Our focus today is on Proposition 6, a ballot measure that will, if passed, ban all slavery in California. Now, you may be thinking, wait a minute, why do we need that? Slavery was abolished in the United States with the ratification of the 13th Amendment back in 1865, right? Well, yes, but there is an exception in both the US and California constitutions. And that exception is slavery or involuntary servitude can be imposed as punishment for a crime. So, what would this change actually mean if people doing jail or prison time can no longer be forced to work? How would it change prison life? And how might it impact the rest of society? Well, to help us answer these and other questions, our guest today is attorney Carmen-Nicole Cox, Director of Government Affairs for ACLU California Action. Prior to joining ACLU California Action, Carmen spent nearly a decade focusing on criminal justice reform and the root causes of mass incarceration, including as Chief Counsel of Public Policy and Advocacy at United Way California, Capital Region, Deputy Director at For the People, Deputy Legal Affairs Secretary for Governor Jerry Brown, Chief of Legislation at the Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, and Deputy District Attorney in San Joaquin County. A self-described liberation attorney, Carmen is motivated to fight for poverty alleviation and decarceration, in part because her own father died alone on the floor of a prison cell just weeks before his scheduled release. Carmen believes that responsible and compassionate reforms are motivated by love of people, based in evidence, and developed by individuals with lived experience. Carmen-Nicole Cox, a warm welcome to the Lawyers Guild Show.
Oh my goodness, Maria, Jim, thank you so much for having me.
Happy to see you.
Sure. And just a quick reminder to listeners, neither KPFK 90.7 FM nor the Lawyers Guild Show endorses any particular candidate or issue. We're just getting you all the information so you can make your informed decisions. Okay, so attorney Carmen-Nicole Cox, in broad strokes, what exactly is Proposition 6 and how did it make its way onto the November 5th, 2024 ballot?
It's a great question. So Proposition 6 is a constitutional amendment, and it amends language that has been in California's Constitution since 1850. So before the 13th Amendment, we had this language that permits forced labor in this state that entered the Union as a free state and claims to have never practiced or endorsed slavery. So what Proposition 6 is going to do is address this current practice that essentially says we can force, we can extract, we can take human labor from folks who are inside under threat of punishment. And the current system prioritizes that forced labor over rehabilitative needs and therapeutic needs of the folks inside. So the reason we have Prop 6 right now, we need Prop 6 right now, is because our recidivism rates are high. It's because the cost of harm to victims is quite honestly incalculable. Prop 6 is just a common sense approach that says we ought prioritize rehabilitation in a way that allows folks to both work part-time and prioritize their rehabilitation so they're less likely to reoffend when they come home. This is about community safety. It's also about taxpayer dollars. Right now, we're using them in a way that makes absolutely no sense. We are funding this revolving door in and out of jails and prisons. It costs taxpayer dollars. It costs community safety, right? And so that's Prop 6. We're saying $14 billion just on prisons alone makes no sense if you're not actually preparing people for reentry.
Well, gee, that sounds like too rational by that idea. No, I mean, I laughed only not to cry. I mean, but so let's be clear. What are the current rules in jails and prisons, Carmen, regarding forcing people to work? What kind of work are they forced to do? Are they earning any wages at all when they do it? Tell us about what kind of work they're doing, who are they working for, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, thank you. I'll start by just making sure I am responsive to the last point of your question, Maria, which is how did we get here?
Ah,
This is actually placed on the ballot by a bipartisan vote of the legislature. So that
Hmm.
means and it required a supermajority in each house to get out of the legislature. We did that with bipartisan support, and we did that only after significant negotiations with Governor Newsom's team, because of course he's responsible for the safety and operations of the prisons. In terms of the current rules, so while the state constitution mirrors the federal constitution and permits slavery, uh, calling it involuntary servitude, we actually have state law, Penal Code Section 2700, that mandates the secretary to require every incarcerated person to perform as much labor as essentially the secretary so requires. So
Hmm.
the actual mandate to take advantage of the constitutional provision is in state law. And so
mhm.
that Prop 6, when we got it out of the legislature, at the same time, the governor signed a bill that requires CDCR to actually establish voluntary work programs because we absolutely do need the work programs. Folks need those work programs because otherwise they don't get out of their sales, right? They also don't earn dollars. Jim, you say what kind of work do they do and do they earn anything? Well, folks inside do anything from slaughtering cows commercial, um,
Agribusiness.
for agribusiness. They farm alfalfa. They package pistachios. They sew laundry. They make the eyeglasses that we provide to Medi-Cal patients. They cook, they clean, they repair, all inside of the institutions. And as we know, they fight fires. They make license plates. The vast majority of folks recently, I think in June or July of this year, CDCR doubled the minimum wage. So I think it went from 8 cents an hour to 16 cents an hour. Not I
That
think, right?
much.
The minimum wage went from 8 cents an hour to 16 cents an hour. But if you're fighting fires, for example, you're making $1 a day plus $2 an hour when you're on the fire line. And nobody else makes as much as the firefighter. So you're making anywhere between 16 cents an hour to up to $2 an hour. Um, and that's not true. There are some folks, a limited number of folks who work for private business. They do coding and this sort of thing, and they make the same minimum wage that we have here. So they do some of everything, including maintaining the operations of the institutions. And they sign up to do these jobs once they're told they don't have a choice. But even once they have a choice, they'll sign up to do these jobs. But people should be able to sign up to do the jobs. We should not be forcing folks to work. And to your question about the rules, Jim, so here's what happened if a person who, let's say that they work in hospice care inside of the institutions, because that's the thing that they do. So they take care of folks who are in their last days and they clean them, they take them to and from gardens, they feed them. And let's say their patient passes away and they'd like to call off work, right? Because they're grieving. There is no bereavement leave. And if they do take an unapproved day off work, they get written up. That write-up means they could absolutely lose their parole date. It means they will definitely lose a certain number of earned credits. It means they could be confined to their cell, solitary confinement. It means that they won't, if you're a mom, right, and you took the day off work, you called off work, you didn't get it approved, it means you'll lose visitation with your children. Not you might, you do. Once you get written up, these are the consequences that follow.
And if I
So,
may just also thank you for that, but I'm
yeah.
just thinking, you know, this capitalist society, you know,
Mm,
free enterprise and all that crap. I would think that there must be some agribusinesses who are paying their workers, not enough, but they're paying them a hell of a lot more than 16 cents an hour.
mhm.
How is that fair competition? Why aren't they suing the state for the discrimination that places on them trying to make a profit versus the agribusiness that's getting cheap labor,
It's
slave labor?
it's very interesting, Jim, that the Constitution only permits government to exploit labor this way.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. And
Wow.
oh, you're going to say, Maria?
Oh, no, go ahead. Finish your thought, please.
No, I'm just going to say that it's so very important that we make sure that folks are not being denied excuse me, opportunities for rehabilitation just so that someone, whether it's the government saving money or some corporation um, increasing their profit margins. That should not happen. If it happened at all, it certainly shouldn't happen at the expense of folks being rehabilitated and coming back home to our communities.
Right.
And that is what happens now. You can't just say, no, I don't want to go to work today because there's a program I want to go to. The regulations specifically say we'll take into consideration your mental health or anger management or parenting classes that you might need, but what will take precedent are the needs of the operations in the facilities.
Well, speaking of the communities outside of jails and prisons, tell us why you think Proposition 6 would be a step in the right direction for our society as a whole.
Thank you for that. Well, the status quo it's morally wrong. It's anti-public safety. It's fiscally foolish, right? We already, in terms of it being morally wrong, it's slavery. Involuntary servitude is slavery. Period. There's nothing more that needs to be said there. So in a state like California, where we claim to be this bastion of progressive policies, and where we say that we are a California for all that cares greatly about equality and equity and justice, we cannot continue to allow this theft of labor and this essentially this arcane system that prioritizes rehabilitation or prioritizes exploitation actually over rehabilitation. From the anti-public safety lens, I don't just say that to be flippant. Honestly, people are coming home and going back at rates that are not justifiable. You cannot defend our continued investment with this level, this lack of efficacy. Mm-hmm. Every single time someone comes home and commits another crime, there is a victim, right? And that victim is at a loss that we can't even calculate, right? But then we also pay into victims' compensation. You know, there's like all of these systems that are being implicated, which really takes us to the fiscally foolish, but all of these systems that are implicated that we're investing in, but that aren't working. People want to be safe in their communities. And so if they're paying $130,000+ a year for somebody to be incarcerated in prison, that person should come home and be less likely to be a threat to public safety. Mm-hmm. And the fiscally foolish side, $130,000 a person, $14 billion a year, that is twice as much as the most expensive university in California with less than half the efficacy. Mm-hmm. It just doesn't add up.
Well, it sure doesn't. I have to assume that this Proposition 6 has some opposition to it. I mean, the Chamber of Commerce jumps to mind for some strange reason, or half of corporate America. But seriously, I don't know if they're actually on the record about this or not. But who the devil is opposing this?
Yeah,
are they thinking about it? Are they spending lots of money to defeat it? Talk to us about that.
Great question. So when we were in the legislature, we had no formal opposition. And again, we had bipartisan support. I think towards the end in the Senate, there were less than a handful of Republican senators who voted no. Less than a handful, because quite honestly, you don't want to be on record opposing the abolition of slavery in the state of California in 2024. And also, when you look on your voter guide, you'll see that there is no formal opposition. No one registered opposition for Proposition 6 because who wants to be permanently on record having taken that position? Since we've gone to ballot, we've gotten endorsements from well over 100 organizations, from elected officials, from labor unions. But we've also seen the Howard Jarvis Taxpayer Association come out in opposition. And, these folks are... Quite honestly, there's some naivete there. Folks have some concern that this will cost more money, but actually it's going to save us money. The Legislative Analyst Office never suggested, and that's who's responsible for doing alongside the Department of Finance, is responsible for doing the assessment. What would this cost the California public? And they never said, they may have to hire more correctional officers. Folks are like, well, but maybe they'll have to increase wages. Prop 6 does not increase wages. The bill that I mentioned before that requires the secretary to establish a voluntary work program. That bill explicitly says that the secretary of CDCR establishes wages inside of the prisons and that the city and county officials establish wages inside of the jails. So quite honestly, if we're being intellectually honest, there's not increased cost, but there is a substantial likelihood that we're going to reduce our costs, and then we'll be back fighting to make sure all of those cost savings are put into the community for community safety services.
Mhm.
Well, I wanted to follow up a little bit on that fiscal cost. So I noticed in the official voter information guide, it said the fiscal impact is uncertain. So what are some of the reasons why it's hard to predict what the benefit or, cost, which way it would go, and also what the range might be?
Yeah. So in terms of the cost, that I think was the LAO and the Department of Finance are legally obligated to talk with multiple stakeholders. And there are some stakeholders who have presented the hypothetical that folks will be able to demand more pay inside. And so they had to take that into consideration, as well as they took into consideration the fact that if folks are actually able to prioritize rehabilitation, they may actually earn their way out sooner, which would have the result of reducing the $134,000 that we spend each year on folks who are inside. And then additionally, we definitely want to make clear that if folks are not coming out and going back in and coming out and going back in, we're saving all kinds of costs, not just the cost of jail or prison, it's the cost associated with the cops coming out, with the judges and the prosecutors and the defense attorneys engaging in the prosecution practice. Like, there's so much that could be saved if we invest in reducing recidivism, which is what Prop 6 does.
It would seem to me as though this proposition uh, is an enormous first step. And I want to stress both enormous and first step. And I know this always get awkward for people who are putting ballot measures on. It's like with the folks we've had on, a life without parole as opposed to the death penalty. And many of us are opposed to the death penalty and wish that was, but life without parole is an amazing first step. No arguing with that. Under this, as I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, they still will get these miserable wages, but it's voluntary, and that's the enormous first step, it seems to me, morally, legally, and politically, an enormous first step. And then I'm just wondering, and you don't have to comment on this, or maybe you don't know what the thinking is of people who put this on the ballot. I would hope that somewhere down the road we'll be talking to somebody who's put a ballot measure on that says, and when they do this voluntarily, all right, they have their room and board, quote unquote, paid for. They don't necessarily have to be paid what the worker out in the street who's got to find a place to live and feed his kids is earning or she's earning. But by damn, it isn't going to be 18 cents an hour. So you want to make any comments about that? Fine. If not, we can just.
I do, because you make such a good point. There is a movement underway to ensure that all Californians, all of our family members, all of our friends are treated with respect and dignity. And that includes how we compensate folks for their human talent, labor, and skills. And there was a small but mighty and bolstered by many other organizations that moved what was ACA 8 in the legislature through the legislature to become Proposition 6. And that was the 10P program, Anti-Recidivism Coalition, Sister Warriors, Communities United for Restorative Youth Justice, my organization, ACLU California Action, Legal Services for Prisoners with Children. And these same organizations, plus many more I couldn't possibly name, are also involved with legislation that is looking at wages inside, because that is in fact part of a larger conversation. Prop 6 can't do that. You can't do it all at one time, and Prop 6 won't have the result of, or doesn't automatically change wages. But absolutely, it's worth considering. Folks are considering it as part of a larger movement, really just for human dignity in the state of California, no matter where you find yourself situated.
Well, Carmen, I wanted to ask also, I know we are running out of time, but I wanted to get this one in. What about other states? Have any other states passed laws like Proposition 6 banning slavery and involuntary servitude unconditionally, even if it's in punishment for a crime.
Yeah. So believe it or not, Alabama and Tennessee have already beat us to it.
Huh?
Vermont, Rhode Island, Nebraska, Colorado, Utah, Oregon, all within the last, since about 2020, maybe one goes back until to 2018. California is just one of 16 states that continues to have
My goodness.
approve, endorse, permit slavery in its constitution and
Wow.
in practice. So we are for sure behind the times, and this is absolutely policy change that is past due.